With a tight budget, it can be hard to know where to invest in with content. Let's talk through a content experiment you can start running to figure out what your needs are and how to scale to meet those accordingly. Howdy, hey folks. Today I want to dive more into how to build a good pilot test around creating content within your agency, especially as budgets are tight right now and you're trying to figure out where the best allocation of resources lie. Looking at content as a function can be both tempting and terrifying. You know there's potential in offering content as a service to your clients or building an internal content strategy to attract more clients for yourself. But you also recognize how it can get expensive quickly if you're not putting enough parameters around those early operations. As you're figuring out what the best structure looks like internally, where do you start to get some of that initial data? That's what we're going to cover today with our idea of a content experiment, essentially building a pilot test for understanding how content could operate within your organization. The benefit of pilot test is we can try a few new ideas, experiment with the new variables, and see what comes out the other side without having to deeply invest into building out a full content operation. You can usually run these kind of pilot tests relatively cheaply, depending on your current internal resources, what you could allocate toward this, which given the tight budgetary requirements right now in today's environment, might be more interesting than trying to just start content wholesale. Plus, those early lessons allow you to tweak operations and start building a structure that reflects best practices, but also the unique needs of your agency. And that sounds great, but where do we begin? Well, where I've seen a lot of folks make some missteps early on is not setting enough parameters around the initial experiment. They know they should do content, they read a few pieces out there online on maybe how to get started, and maybe sell a content piece or two to a client. From there, they just kind of start winging it and hope they figure it out. And while that might seem an easier approach in the short term, you're robbing yourself of the ability to gather really useful data, both quantitative and qualitative, to make good decisions on what the future of content would look like in your organization. Conversely, I've seen folks who get so worried or terrified that they're trying to manage 1,000 different variables and never get off the starting block. A good content experiment, a good pilot test, straddles the line between those two. We're not going to invest huge amounts of resources, but we are going to get something starting, get some momentum moving. Those initial parameters are going to be answering a couple key questions. Things like, what's our overall strategy here? What does success look like at the end of this program? What do we want to achieve? I'd try to establish as many quantitative variables on that as you can. Figures like potential revenue generated, number of content pieces created, views or engagement metrics that you drive, whether internally or to a client. All of those can help set the stage for what a good pilot test is going to look like. Also think through operationally of what you want that to look like. So this is where maybe more qualitative or anecdotal evidence can come in. So ask people who are working on the team, are we finding internal talent who can accomplish this? Are we finding we have a need for external freelancer talent? If so, how much is that costing us? You really need the nuts and bolts and the black and the white here, that financial data, to ensure you're running a really good pilot test. From there, you can figure out what internal resources you need. Are there folks in your agency who have expressed an interest in writing? Or are you writing currently, but you haven't really commoditized content as a function yet? I think a lot of folks' minds jump immediately to go hiring freelance or contractor talent. And that's certainly an avenue. But if you have internal folks already who can produce content at some level, that might be enough to get started for a pilot test. Again, it goes back to what you expect from the strategic objectives around a good pilot test. So finding internal resources that map to what you can produce now will help keep those costs low and make it a much more interesting test, especially from executive leadership's perspective. As for what types of content to produce, I think especially for an early pilot test, you want to identify one, maybe two items of content that you can produce efficiently, regularly, and consistently. Maybe you offer an awards package around award season, or maybe it's focused on thought leadership creation, so writing drafts on behalf of clients, or maybe it's social media pieces that you're producing, like long-form LinkedIn thought leadership. Whatever that is, be specific about what you want to sell and sell just those one or two opportunities. I think a lot of pilot tests can go by the wayside or fall apart if you try to sell too many things at the same time. It's too many dependent variables that get too hard to track. A good experiment needs to limit the amount of outside influence that can affect the results that you're trying to find. Part of parameter setting is also market quantification. So really understanding what your market could potentially bear and if the products that you're thinking about selling fit within that market potential. Even something as simple as surveying your current clients and asking what kind of content needs they might have now or 6 to 12 months in the future can give you a sense qualitatively of what products you should be positioning in front of them. But you can also run some quick analyses of that market, really understanding your total addressable market, service addressable market, and service obtainable market, TAM, SAM, and SOM. Not only is understanding TAM, SAM, and SOM important for building your parameters, but it also helps you sell the story later on once you finish your pilot test. If we recognize there's a live market here and something that can generate significant revenue, then you've got something that can scale from test to fuller implementation more easily and more lucratively. From there, it's up to you if you want to run this internally only or offer it as an external service to potential clients. It can be nerve-wracking wanting to sell something that's relatively untested, especially in a test phase if you're not convinced you want to commit to it for the long haul. But I think that helps you structure contracts and retainers more effectively. If you're running, let's say, a 90-day pilot test, you can build a contract out for whatever, 60 or 90 days, depending on how much time you want to give in there to think things through, and put some time boundaries on that pilot test that are relatively well enforced. Yes, there's a bit of institutional risk inherent in this. If it doesn't go well, or you write content poorly, or you end up putting yourself in maybe a potential awkward position during an upselling or reselling period, those are absolutely possibilities. You have to factor those into your overall parameters and, again, those strategic objectives. If you're really uncomfortable with that and you want to try it out for yourself first, run some internal operations. Identify a strategic communications pillar within your current organization and build your pilot test to reflect communicating more around that. Let's say one of your quarterly communication goals to your clients is sharing the value of thought leadership, so the quantitative and qualitative benefits of conducting thought leadership, ideally to sell them down the road, but also to create awareness and drive your own internal traffic. You can build a pilot test to reflect filling out that need and still measure the kind of data that can help you determine if content makes sense for your organization. I think a 90-day horizon is enough to gather sufficient data and give you the time you need to work through any kind of initial kinks or challenges in your operations. I think that just makes a lot of sense and it aligns with quarterly objectives that most organizations are following. As you start conducting your pilot test, you start having people produce content, whether internally or externally, you also need to be tracking the metrics that tie back to those strategic objectives. It's going to be things like measuring conversion rates, engagement rates if you're trying to build something internally. Look at turnaround times and production times. Are you meeting timeline expectations? If you are trying to sell externally to clients, are you meeting the revenue expectations you've set? Are you matching what you thought you'd be selling? Or are you off the mark in some way? Be sure you understand the costs of doing business as well. For a pilot test like this, a lot of those costs are probably going to be very variable and indirect. You're looking at hours spent from your internal talent. If you are hiring external contractors, that's a little bit more obvious, but that's still also going to be a variable cost based on how you're using them. Regardless, you want to assess revenue generation, cost inlay, and the margin on that to understand the financial implications of your pilot test. Part of what you'll get from gathering this kind of data is understanding cost-effective approaches to producing this kind of work. And especially in turbulent economic times, knowing that kind of information is going to help you sell this case better to internal leadership and clients externally. Now, one caveat I'll add to this is if your organization right now is in really dire straits, if you've got maybe 3 to 6 months of cash on hand left and then the lights go out, this is not the time to run this kind of pilot test or experiment. Right now, you need to be focusing on your core services and selling those more effectively and making sure you're delivering at the kind of high quality that your clients expect. This kind of potential organizational change is better suited for organizations approaching it from a position of strength instead of need. If you're on relatively even footing, if you're hiring people, if you're building out really good cash flow here for the next 9, 12, 18 months, now's a good time to really start exploring that pilot test. Now, if you're not at the executive level and you can't necessarily authorize this, you might have to go and get some permission for some of this or even an initial budget outlay. So write all this down in a multi-page document, put together some of those initial numbers and market quant, and build a good case to take in front of your ELT to really explain this to them. Or if you're in an organization that gives you a little bit more latitude to try this out, just try it out. You still need to build out that kind of parameter setting because you need to know what success looks like. But if you have a budget set aside already, you don't really need a budget because you have enough internal resources to execute this effectively, you can really kind of start building on your own and inform ELT rather than turn to them for permission and budget. Again, that comes the big caveat of do what's best for the organization. Don't step on too many toes if it's going to get you in deep trouble. But a lot of this is going to be getting over that initial inertia of trying to do something about content. And a pilot test, well executed like this, is going to help you push that rock down the hill and get things moving. So I hope you take this and start thinking about content in your organization. Think about how this could potentially drive new revenue streams, new client opportunities, and new operational efficiencies within your current organization. Well, that's the Wednesday Word. Good to see you all. Thanks so much for watching.